This is Gary Pillar, and in this screencast, the second in the series on planning and preparing a manuscript for a short presentation, I will look in more practical terms at how to follow the IMRaD format, which, as I mentioned in the first screencast, has an hourglass structure, broad at the top and bottom, and narrow in the middle. But rather than follow the order as seen in the final manuscript, I will look at it in terms of a more natural order that the preparation of the manuscript often takes. Starting with the results section, which defines the specific topic of the manuscript. Then moving on to the method section, followed by the discussion, and then finally looking at the writing of an introduction. As mentioned previously, a critical first step in any manuscript is the selection of data to include in the manuscript, as this will determine what the focus of the manuscript will be and how it will be written up. This is because if the listener is to avoid confusion, only a limited subset of data or information can be effectively used, particularly in a short presentation. Once the backbone of your story has been decided, selection of the data should follow a very strict criteria. The highest priority going to data that is the most convincing and is clearly relevant to the hypothesis, while less convincing but relevant results should only be included with discretion, and irrelevant results should rarely, if ever, be included. The selected results should then be written up in such a way as to answer the following questions. What do the results say? What do these results mean in their context? Who needs to know about the results? And why do they need to know? When writing up the results, there is a temptation to jump straight to the most interesting data. But before doing this, you need to give your listener a general overview or the big picture of what the results found before progressing on to the details of the core data. Once these general observations have been made and the context set, then you can progress to more specific observations of key variables that will aid the listener's understanding of your analysis. But I must emphasize again, you do not need to include all the data you have collected, but only that data that helps the listener to further understand the implications of the research. When writing up the manuscript, and in particular in the results section, the use of verb tense is a very important tool to differentiate between what you or the researcher did and found, which is always written in the past tense, from that to distinguish situations that are always true, or statements or observations that can be considered to be accepted by most researchers in the field. In this case, the present tense is used. For example, this is in agreement with the observations made, where it's in the present tense. Other tips for the results section include: start with a clear message. Do not duplicate information in the text, tables, or graphics. Separating results from discussion preserves objectivity and your credibility. The methods should contain sufficient detail for listeners to replicate your work and presumably get the same results. Is a typical statement of what the method section aims to do. So the message in your method section should be, this is exactly what I did. I did it carefully and with a lot of thought. And these are the reasons I did what I did. By doing so, you enable other researchers to repeat your experiments and show you are confident they will obtain the same results. You create credibility in your research and allow the listener to evaluate the results themselves and to confirm for themselves that your interpretation is valid. As the method section is to help readers evaluate the findings presented in the results section, the structure of the two sections should be related to each other. To show these connections, use similar subheadings in the methods and the results sections, and use introductory phrases or sentences that relate to the objectives of the research. Thus, the method section should begin with a general overview, followed by subheadings giving specific details of the research undertaken, and as mentioned previously, creating credibility for the research and the thinking behind it, which is so vital. So these subsections should contain reasons why you chose to do what you did. There are important differences between our report and research writing. In these series of videos, we are aiming at research writing, going beyond just simply obtaining and describing results, which is what report writing limits itself to. Research writing aims to make sense of the results by putting them in the context of current knowledge, showing the relationships among the observed results, noting any principles or generalizations that can be gained from the results, as well as considering the implications of the research in a broader context. Where necessary, it also highlights any contradictions with previous research. Thus, in the discussion, you should be able to find answers to questions like, how do the results solve or reorient the original question or problem? Are your results consistent with reported research on the subject? If not, then what are the possible reasons for this? And are there any other possible interpretations? Your discussion needs to clearly relate to the issues set out in the introduction and needs to closely reflect what was written there. Some common structural issues include, near the start of the discussion, revisit the main purpose or hypothesis, but do not repeat it word for word. Review the most important findings, whether they support the hypothesis or not. Do they agree with other published research? Interpret or explain your results in the light of other research. What are the limitations or shortcomings of your research? What are some of the possible applications, implications, or significance of your research? And finally, what are your recommendations for future research? A good introduction is like an upside-down pyramid, where you start with a wide overview, but move in a logical sequence towards the hypothesis, which should be the final element of the introduction. You are attempting to explain to the listener the rationale behind the work and establishing the importance of the work. It works upon the principle of setting the broad context of the research and then gradually defining or delimiting what particular aspect of the research problem is being focused on. And finally, the hypothesis of how the research problem can be solved. By doing so, it hopefully convinces the listener that the work has been well thought out and at the same time orients them to your way of thinking about the problem. So, to reiterate, the introduction sets the context of the research, defines the problem, defines the scope of the research, and states the objectives of the research. Hopefully this explanation will help you in your efforts to prepare a manuscript for a short presentation. Thank you.